to go up to Canada to fish with my friends Brian Chan and Phil Rowley. As always, our fishing trips start with a visit to the Canadian version of Starbucks. A visit to Tim.
So underrated because there's just so many of them. I think a lot of anglers are intimidated using scuds because you feel like it's a needle in a haystack proposition. But that trout got that belly on a lot of big ticket items and a lot of small things as well. And scuds really help pack on the weight.
Well, not really well.
Okay, hold two seconds. I'm gonna get the still you going on this thing. Come on,
okay, ready? Get still.
Yeah.
Look at the size of this thing. Again?
Yeah. Yes, Jack, in Alberta you can fish up to 3 flies, and it's a great way using multiple fly rigs to search out which pattern is working, which size may be working, and fish different depths to find out what zone the fish are in for that
Okay,
day.
now I've set up as per your instructions with the strike indicator.
Yeah, it's a great way to
I'm
suspend.
bringing it in, and you recommended it to start out with about 5 feet underneath?
Yeah, you want to hang the flies depending on the bottom cover, and we've got weeds in here, so you're casting into about 7-8 feet. So you're about 1 to 2 feet off the bottom so the fish can find that fly suspending. And in this wind we've got here, it's much like fishing a river. You reach casts and mends and just allow that fly to sweep right along the shoreline, and you can fish it dead drift, or every once in a while you can give it a little 6 to 12 inch pull, and that'll pitch those chironomids up and let them sit down and let them drift. It kind of lets your fly stand out in the crowd a little bit.
Smooth strip or a little fast?
No, you can just one slow pull and then just let it sit.
Okay.
Because quite often the take will come right after you've made that strip.
I noticed you weren't making really long casts from when I was watching you fish this from the shore yesterday.
No, with indicators, because your fly is hanging through 90 degrees, floating line going this way, and then your fly hanging straight down, you want to keep your indicators close to you, so when that fish pulls it under, you can simply get to it faster. You got too far away,
you got to pull up a lot
pull
of
off
line,
a lot of
don't you?
line and he'll spit it out.
I think I got the weed.
Whoa!
I thought I had
We're
the weeds. Well, he's coming in, but I got a lot of line here. I think he's about to take some line.
Oh, that one's got some shoulders.
Yeah, he does. That's what I came to Canada for.
Yeah.
Well, you know, whoa, that's what we like. Whoa!
Whoa, that's a... He hasn't missed too many meals. Holy smokes, Jack, that's a fish and a half. And I'll kneel down here, so
Yeah.
2 big tall bodies. I don't think he's coming in anytime soon.
No, he isn't. Okay, here
Yeah,
we go.
their first flea response in a lake is to head for deep
Whoa.
water like that.
Yep,
That's respectable.
very respectable. Here we go. We're gonna launch him right over.
Oh, I don't know. I guess.
Do you have a big enough net for this?
Yeah. Right in the.
You think I'm gonna tice him up when I get home? What do you think, folks? Hold him up so the folks can see.
If you can
what
just
an
hold.
I can hold the net.
I'm not sure I can.
What an Albertan rainbow.
Oh, I think you might have a double-digit fish here, Jack.
Oh, I like DDs.
That,
Whoa,
folks, is why you go Stillwater fly fishing.
you
Well
got my
done.
boat.
Well done, Jack.
It was
Oh,
great. Whoa,
there he goes. Off he goes.
Off he goes. Great.
Well done.
Patience for bringing me here. Well, Phil, we tried the Clearwater chironomid just a few minutes ago, and it didn't really work. And you know, I've always heard about this signature fly of yours, so the Chromy.
Yes.
And I didn't know. I'd heard about it down in the U.S. and I didn't know it was your pattern. A lot of people pick it up and become their pattern.
Well, it's I talked about it in my book, and it's a fly that came around after observing natural pupa and the effect the trapped air and gases have on their body. They take this the trapped air and gases, and it's right along the skin of the pupal skin, and it gives the fly, gives the pupa a distinct silvery glow that really masks its true color. So it looks almost silver, and it's a real key for the trout when the hatch is strong. And it's just proven over the years to be just a fantastic chironomid pattern for me. It's got to be my favorite.
I'm putting one on right now. I know you have one on.
Never leave home without it.
So when do you fish the Chromy without an indicator?
Yes, you can, Jack, and it's a favorite method of mine. Hand twist retrieve, or just simply pull the fly back in very slow pulls. Basically, you just want to keep the slack taken up in the line. It's a feel for it. You done it, Jack.
Well, you know, when I was talking, I had that Chromy of yours on, and it was just laying right here by the boat, and I was listening to you talk, and next thing I know, I got a fish on. I don't know what kind of fish it is. It might be a dumb fish, but you know, it was just laying there. Did that Chromy kind of like do that?
Well, yeah, because the chironomids emerge slowly. you know, wiggle and elevate their way up to the surface. So there's lots of rests along that journey. And oh, this is a nice fish, Jack. This is a very nice fish.
Will you quit telling him that?
Well,
You know?
I'm trying to stroke his ego, make him want to come on board.
I know.
Well, that's a very
Well,
nice fish.
you know, that was really interesting because we were talking about switching in and doing another fly, and I had that Chromy still on. I've been leaving it on and changing flies underneath it.
Yeah.
And because we know there's always chironomids out there. So your idea of making it really shine and chrome was...
Just make it stand out in the crowd.
Whoa!
I think you've got a very nice fish on here, Jack.
Yes.
Another.
I like when they do that. Like, yeah, come on.
They got
They're
attitude.
sort of like a jab. I kind of like a fighter. They're jabbing.
Yeah, and then they're going to give you the knockout punch.
Yep.
Do you know how to catch anything other than these big ones, Jack?
Oh, got off.
Oh, he broke away. Well, that's too
Broke
bad.
off on it, and that was my fault. A real bad move on here.
Well, that's all right. We're going to let him go anyway.
Yep.
That was a good fish, too.
Yeah, it was.
Snapped him? Yeah, he broke.
Broke it.
Yeah, he broke it clean. Dirty dog.
Good fish.
Yes, that was a big fish.
Better.
It's a chironomid pupa pattern, and buzzer is the term the English use for
Right.
chironomid, so it just sort of all flowed together when I was creating it at the vise. And what I've done here is, because we, as you can see, we have a little bit of a windy day,
Yeah?
I've switched up to an intermediate line, which is the
Right.
slowest sinking line you can get, and it allows us to get that fly just underneath the surface of the waves, so the wave action isn't pitching that fly unnaturally, and I can swing that through right off the tip of this point, and we're going to swing the fly across the wind and allow it to sweep down into those wind lanes, and the fish will stack up in there just like in the river and eat whatever comes down their way. So
Well, I've got the chironomid. I'm doing the dual fly thing. Got a chironomid and another pattern. Kind of pull it down a little bit
yeah,
and do the same thing.
Exactly.
I've got an intermediate line too.
yeah, it's a great tactic on these windy days, and just put
Well-
it right across.
Notice we've got this point here, and we've got wind lines.
Yep.
And will the wind lines bring the chironomids and kind of stack them
Yeah,
up
they
in
can
there?
concentrate them because the wind causes a rotation effect that pulls and collects food sources.
All right. Well, let's go. Can I fish up here?
You
Then-
can, yep, right off,
swing?
put it right off that point and let it swing
Okay.
out into that dark water.
Now, what kind of techniques? I notice you're doing a very, very slow retrieve.
Very slow hand twist. Just to, again, just like with the floating line method, we want to keep things just tense. We want to stay tight to the fly, so if any kind of take, we can feel them. Oh, you bugger.
Right there.
See, right in the wind lane.
Yep, I saw that. You know, a lot of lake fishing is really concentrating, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a
It's
lot
more
of
of a solitary thing. You don't sit there and chat and gab and everything. You're really concentrating on the feel.
and working the fly, making that fly come to life and be the food source it's intended to represent or suggest.
And just below the surface, you think the damsels don't they swim in to shore?
Yes, they do, Jack. We're perfectly positioned here. We're right up tight to the bank, and damselflies swim towards shore just beneath the surface. A lot of times when the hatch is strong, en masse, and they'll swim right towards the shoreline where they'll emerge on the long stem bulrush or cattails or the rocks themselves or the sides of the boat in this case. So we're perfectly positioned here because we're retrieving our flies in the same direction that the migrating nymphs will.
Now, I know you're using a intermediate slow sinking line. Now, I've got a couple. I've got your grizzly damsel, and then I've got a chironomid, kind of giving them two different flies. I'm just letting it drift,
Yeah.
and they rest, don't they, when they're...
Yeah, they swim with a, I guess the proper scientific term is a sinusoidal, more like a snake-like swimming motion. So a lot of energy is expended, but they don't seem to make much forward progress. They're getting there, but not at any great world record pace. So there's lots of rests. So by hanging that fly like you've got under an indicator and giving it a strip, that grizzly damsel, all those materials will come alive and look like the wiggling nymph. And then as you stop, they'll settle back down. And as that nymph settles, it'll imitate a resting nymph. There's a fish right there.
Yep.
Looks like you
There-
took a nymph right underneath the surface.
Right underneath the surface. The damsels are coming in. Now, do you readjust by stripping a little faster?
Well, I just thought I'd pick it up and maybe I can attract him. He looked like he was heading back down and may not actually see the fly. So I'm just trying to pull it through and draw attention to it and see if he'll come up and have a look. But he doesn't appear to want to do that.
I'm going to take and do one of those 12-inch strips with that.
Yeah. Let's see if you can draw him that way.
Exciting to see fish moving on a lake. I think that's one of the things a lot of anglers miss when they say, I don't want to go to the lake because it's always stripping flies in. And when they're close to the surface, it's like fishing a spring creek.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Well, there you go, Jack. Proof in the pudding.
Well, it's about time to get my fly out of the way. This looks pretty neat.
Yeah, he's nice and silver bright, and he's somewhat upset with what's going on right now. So
yeah, this is what I like about being up in Canada here with the Kamloops rainbow.
We're just going to get this fly line off the ground so I don't do something silly like
step on it.
Step on it, yeah. Oh, now he's running towards me. No, now he's going out to sea.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Well, you know, I could actually do something productive like net the fish for you. Well, I'm really glad that when we were together at the show, the fly fishing show in Calgary, and you invited me up here to Alberta and to this great lakes that you've got here. Look how fat that fish is. Holy cow.
That's a nice fish. Well, let's get that.
That's what you call a football fish. It's amazing, even with the barbless fly, how they can get in that mandible.
He's just whacked it, and he's just...
Here.
There we go.
Got it?
I just got to turn the fly around. There we go. Out she comes.
You know, that's a good average-sized lake fish, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll take 100 of those.
I mean, that's the kind you're going to expect to catch on a lake.
Yeah. There he goes. He's well rested. Like that, but what we're going to do is come in with our scissors and trim them, about half their distance. So they're just about as wide, slightly slender, more slender than the width of the body. So just trim them like that. And again, you can see, and that's the completed grizzly dragon. Again, we're going to fish this on fast sinking lines, type 3, 4, 5, even 6 densities, and let that short leader anywhere from 3 to 6 feet, depending on the weed growth and the bottom structure. And that fast sinking line drags this fly down into the depths, and the buoyant nature of this fly will suspend this above the bottom and keep it virtually weedless. Just trim the bottom here. Again, what you're looking for here is a nice, scruffy, big steak for a foraging rainbow or brown or brook trout to come up behind and inhale. Be careful, strikes to this fly tend to be kind of severe.
Well, you know, it's starting to get into the mid-afternoon and warming up. It's dragonfly time. If this was probably a hot August day, we'd be definitely looking at the dragonflies. But you know, the dragonfly nymphs are always in the water.
Yes, they are, Jack.
And you told me that, by God, this fly could work right now.
Mm-hmm.
But tell us a little bit about the fishing these dragonflies and a little bit of why you tie it the way you do.
Well, I pretty well tie all of my dragonfly patterns the same basic philosophy, and that's one focused around buoyancy. And what we've got here is a grizzly dragon. It's had a dunking already, and you can see when the fly is dry, it looks like a bit like a feather duster. But once it gets wet, all the marabou lies down, and this fly has a buoyant core with a foam underbody and foam eyes, borrowed from an English pattern called the booby. And the idea of this, I'm fishing this fly on a fast-sinking type 6 fly line with a very short leader. I've probably got 4 or 5 feet of leader. That's it. And the concept being that the fly line pulls this fly, literally drags it under the surface, and the fly line is actually lying along the bottom, and I'm just creepy crawling and inching this fly along, and because it's buoyant in nature, it's going to resist hanging up on the bottom, and fish can come up behind it and take it in. And takes to this are usually pretty solid. So what we're doing here is I've cast the fly line out, and I'm using a variety of retrieves, a steady hand twist to imitate a nymph that's just out and about looking for food. They're very predatory in nature, so I'm just imitating the fly as it's crawling over the bottom. I can add a few quick strips to draw attention to the fly and then let it sit. And dragonflies have the ability to shoot water out of their abdomens out the backside, and they can jet along in 4 to 6 inch bursts, and they use this to escape potential predators such as trout or other larger dragonfly nymphs, and also as a last sort of bull rush when they attack whatever prey they've got in mind. And they can eat and tackle. They'll eat small minnows, each other, damselflies, mayflies, chironomid larvae, pupa if there's one hanging near the bottom. They're just voracious predators.
In other words, they're very crude insects. Exciting to see fish moving on a lake. I think that's one of the things a lot of anglers miss when they say, I don't want to go to the lake because it's always dripping flies in. And when they're close to the surface, it's like fishing a spring creek.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Well, there you go, Jack. Proof in the pudding.
Well, it's about time to get my fly out of the way. This looks pretty neat.
Yeah, he's nice and silver bright, and he's somewhat upset with what's going on right now. So
yeah, this is what I like about being up in Canada here with the Kamloops rainbow.
We're just going to get this fly line off the ground so I don't do something silly like
step on it.
Step on it, yeah. Oh, now he's running towards me. No, now he's going out to sea.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Well, you know, I could actually do something productive like net the fish for you. Well, I'm really glad that when we were together at the show, the fly fishing show in Calgary, and you invited me up here to Alberta and to this great lakes that you've got here. Look how fat that fish is. Holy cow.
That's a nice fish. Well, let's get
That's what you call a football fish. It's amazing, even with the barbless fly, how they can get in that mandible.
He's just whacked it, and he just...
Here.
There we go.
Got it?
I just got to turn the fly around. There we go. Out she comes.
You know, that's a good average size lake fish, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll take 100 of those.
I mean, that's the kind you're going to expect to catch on a lake.
Yeah. There he goes. He's well rested.
Clearwater pupa, best fished on a dry line and a long leader, by long 12 to 20 feet depending on the water depth. Remember, the formula is 25% more leader than the water is deep. So for example, if I'm fishing 15 feet of water, that's going to dictate about a 19-foot leader. And just cast it out, allow it enough time to sink, and inch it back to you slowly, and just be prepared for that line to jump out of your fingers or tighten slowly as a big rainbow or brown trout has chewed down your Clearwater pupa.
Well, we're at now on chironomids. We've rigged it up, and I noticed you rigged the chironomids with double chronies.
Yes, Jack. In Alberta, you can fish up to 3 flies, and it's a great way using multiple fly rigs to search out which pattern is working, which size may be working, and fish different depths to find out what zone the fish are in for that.
Okay, now I've set up as per your instructions with the strike indicator.
Yeah, it's a great way to suspend.
I'm bringing it in, and you recommended it to start out with about 5 feet underneath.
Yeah, you want to hang the flies depending on the bottom cover, and we've got weeds in here, so you're casting into about 7-8 feet. So you're about 1 to 2 feet off the bottom, so the fish can find that fly suspending. And in this wind we've got here, it's much like fishing a river. You reach casts and mends and just allow that fly to sweep right along the shoreline, and you can fish it dead drift, or every once in a while you can give it a little 6 to 12 inch pull, and I'll pitch those chironomids up and let them sit down and let them drift. It kind of lets your fly stand out in the crowd a little bit.
Smooth strip or a little fast?
No, you can just one slow pull and then just let it sit.
Okay.
Because quite often the take will come right after you've made that strip.
I noticed you weren't making really long casts from when I was watching you fish this from the shore yesterday.
No, with indicators, because your fly is hanging through 90 degrees, floating line going this way, and then your fly hanging straight down, you want to keep your indicators close to you, so when that fish pulls it under, you can simply get to it faster. You got too far away,
you got to pull up a lot of line.
You pull up a lot of line and he'll spit it out.
Here we go.
As you can tell, learning to fish a chironomid is as much as learning how to tie one. Where do we go next? I know that you have a pattern that's really your pattern, and one you used to call your signature fly.
Yeah, it's probably the one I'm most known for, and that's the Chromy right here.
What a name.
Well, it's a different looking fly. You see most Stillwater flies are very somber colors, olives and browns, those kind of things. And this fly has a silver body, and that's quite a break. And it's simply because when we observed chironomids capturing the natural pupa as they ascend. Like many other insects, they use trapped air and gases to help both elevate their ways to the surface and to aid the final emergence process. And this gives the fly a real distinct silvery glow, and it's a real attractor to the trout. I've seen in Clearwater situations trout veer off course and belt this fly, and it's probably my #1 chironomid pattern. It's on my line 60–70% of the time when the hatch is on.
That's an endorsement if I've ever heard of one. So let's go to the vise and see how to tie the Chromy.
Okay, I'm now going to tie my favorite chironomid pupa pattern, the Chromy. One that's served me well for well over 10–12 years now. And when you first look at it, you think, boy, that doesn't follow your typical chironomid designs. It's a non-standard color. And the whole premise of this fly is building an imitation that suggests the trapped air and gases that pupa use to elevate the way to the surface. And it gives that pupa a distinct silvery glow that's a real key for foraging trout when the hatch is good and heavy. So what I've done is I've placed a size 10 curved scud pupa hook into the vise. You can tie this fly from 18 all the way up, and I'm not kidding you here, a size 6. On some of the western lakes, the productive muddy bottom lakes, we get the big bomber chironomid pupa patterns that are size 8, 3 extra long, or a 6 curved scud pupa hook does an excellent job representing those large pupa. Very fun hatch to fish. So I've slid a size 7/64 black bead up onto the debarbed hook, and I'm just going to pull it back away from the eye momentarily, and I'm just going to attach tying thread directly behind the hook eye. And I'm just going to trim away the excess tying thread. Now, with the tying thread right up behind the hook eye, I'm going to take the midge gill material we're going to use to suggest the gills, take a single strand of this, and tie it in place, a couple of wraps, position it so it's on top, and to do that I kind of grab both ends and wiggle and pull, and it settles the material right on top of the hook shank. Some additional securing wraps, and I'm going to come in and trim off the back end of the midge gill on an angle so that it helps build up a nice taper. So we're going to cover up the butts of that midge gill, place a couple of wraps directly in front to cock it up. Okay, we're now going to take our whip finisher, and with a minimum of wraps, whip finish the fly at this point. If you're going to tie a fair number of chromies, that's always a good idea, I'd recommend that you do this stage, just tie up half a dozen or whatever, how many you're going to tie, and just complete this step with just tying in the gills, and then you can sit down, add the beads, and build the rest of the flies. Much more efficient way. So now we've got that in place. I'm just going to slide the bead up over the thread and reattach the tying thread directly behind that black metal bead. And again with a minimum of wraps. Now, since this is a size 10, we still have to be aware of keeping this fly nice and skinny, but we can also add a few bits of, few wraps of thread, if you will, to help provide traction for the materials and help build up a slight taper towards the front of the fly. Ever so slight. We're talking maybe 3 or 4 layers of thread here. Looks like a lot, but really I'm just going back and forth, primarily in the forward area of the shank. I want to build up a slight taper, just like the natural pupa have. For the ribbing, I originally used to use fine red wire, and since the advent and the popularity of red holographic mylar, this makes an excellent ribbing material on many chironomids. What it suggests is the residual hemoglobin that many species retain during their transition to the pupa, and it gives the fly distinct dark crimson, maroon, red banding that is a real key for the imitation as well. So again, like with most of my ribs, I just secure this down the near side of the hook by pulling that material slightly towards myself to help keep it in place along the side so it doesn't twist and roll out of the way. And now I'm going to take my tying thread and once again wind it forward where we're going to tie in our body material. For the body material, I'm going to use some silver flashabou, colors 6901. And what I've done is I've cut a little notch right out of the side, and this really helps control your flashaboos, and it also works well on crystal flash. You're just simply going to reach in with your scissors points and pull out the quantity of flashaboo that you want. There's a strand I want there. I've already got one out. There's one. And there's two. Right there. I got three in this case. No big deal. But you can see that this is going to really save your flashaboo. You're not going to end up with a big jumbled mess that can often sit in the tying area and just be a source of frustration for you. So I've got two strands here. I'm going to moisten them to keep them together. And then I'm going to simply tie these two strands in place directly behind the bead. So make sure you've got them good and firmly tied in place, and then stroke them together. And what we're going to do is take the silver flashaboo and I'm going to wind them down to where the rib is tied and then back up to form a complete silver body. It's kind of a technique borrowed from tying traditional streamer patterns such as the Mickey fin. And you'll notice I moisten my fingers throughout this process to help keep these materials together. Because you tied them in as one, they tend to behave as one, but there are times that they can get away from each other, and you've always got to be careful around those chemically sharpened hooks because they will cut through flashaboo in the blink of an eye. And if you have a few gaps, not to worry, because one of the benefits of this overwrapping method is you get to come all the way back up and fill in any of the blanks that you may have missed. And again, you can, depending on the size of the fly, obviously larger versions, you've got to be a little more frugal with your use of the flashaboo, but this size 10, I can go fairly close wraps and build up a slight taper with the material as well, in addition to what I've done with the thread underbody. You can see we're just carrying that up in nice, close touching turns. And again, moisten the fingers intermittently throughout this process to help keep everything sort of stuck together, if you will. And we just pass the bobbin over a couple of times, and then I'm going to fold that excess flashaboo back over the body slightly and bind it in place so it's well and truly secure. And there we have the very non-standard silver chironomid body, and due in part to the Chromy namesake. Now we're just going to counterwind this ribbing over the body, and we're also going to use the ribbing to form a little red butt. Many species of chironomids retain, again, that residual hemoglobin in the tip of the abdomen, and it is often a distinct red coloration, and this can be a key trigger to represent on a chironomid pattern. So just about every pupil pattern I tie tends to feature a red butt. So what we're going to do to suggest that here is, as we start to counterwind the ribbing, I'm going to place 3 to 4 wraps of the red holographic mylar right next door to each other to create this red butt. And then I'm just going to simply, on the next wrap, the 5th wrap, open up and carry this forward, creating a distinct red rib. And again, don't get too worried about anatomical correctness, just get that nice even spacing as you work the rib forward. Now be careful when you wind holographic materials. You don't want to pull on them too hard, simply because you'll stretch them out, and it really reduces the luster of the material, which is such a benefit to this pattern. Again, we're trying to suggest the trapped air and gases the pupa uses to aid its pupal ascent and its emergence. Once the pupa comes up to the surface, split forms along the back, the adult climbs out on top and flies away, and that expulsion of those gases underneath the cuticle of the pupal skin helps sort of launch that new chironomid adult into the air. We're almost done here. I'm going to tie in a single strand of peacock curl by the tip. Well, almost the tip, because I trim about the first 3/8 of the tip area away because it's so brittle. But the reason I like the tip is the fibers are nice and full. Just like any feather, the fibers tend to reduce as you get near the butt area, and we want a nice full fibered thorax on this fly. So I'm just going to hold it alongside of the fly, and with a minimum of wraps again, I'm going to secure that peacock curl in place, and you notice the thread is hanging directly behind the black metal bead. And now I'm just going to wind this around, and essentially the peacock curl, you could argue, is just to fly tier's paranoia, if you will. I'm just trying to cover up all my thread work and hide all my work. So a couple of wraps in front, a couple of wraps behind to secure the peacock herl, and then trim away the excess. Now peacock herl, as probably most of you know, is pretty fragile and a good chewing by a few trout, and this can come unraveled. So I'll show you this technique here to reinforce it, and I take the brushable super glue again, the fisherman's glue, and I coat about 3/8 of an inch of the thread, and I simply wind that in place directly behind the bead, and I'm going to allow the thread pressure of my wraps to squeeze out that brushable glue into the base of the peacock herl, further reinforcing it. And now we've just got a couple of steps left. First, we're going to whip finish the fly directly behind the bead, and that's one of the advantages of these Mattarelli style whip finishers, is you can place whip finishes wherever you'd like on the fly. Trim away the thread. We're going to trim our gills. Standard gill proportions I use. Make your gills as long as the bead. So no matter what size fly you got, your gills will always be roughly the same size. And now we're going to add a little durability and shine, further shine if you can believe it, to this sort of atypical chironomid pattern. Flashabou and holographic mylar are not the most durable of materials, so we use the brushable fisherman's glue again to reinforce them. And when I tie these in quantity, I'll do this process all at once with a bunch, and I have a little rotary dryer, much like drying saltwater flies, that I'll stab these flies in and just let the body dry that way. But we can also do it, rotate with the vise. This glue dries very, very fast. So there you have it, the Chromy. A very non-standard pattern for most familiar with traditional chironomid colors, the earth tones I call them, the browns, the olives, the blacks, those kind of more traditional colors. This fly really works well when the hatch is on, or when fish are used to seeing chironomids. And it could also be argued it attracts them a little bit. But whatever the reason, it sure works, and I sure recommend you tie up as many of these as you can, because it's an excellent chironomid pupa pattern, the Chromy.
Well, Phil, we tried the Clearwater chironomid just a few minutes ago, and it didn't really work. And you know, I've always heard about this signature fly of yours, so the Chromy.
Yes.
And I didn't know. I'd heard about it down in the U.S. and I didn't know it was your pattern. A lot of people pick it up and become their pattern.
Well, it's I talked about it in my book, and it's a fly that came around after observing natural pupa and the effect the trapped air and gases have on their body. They take this the trapped air and gases, and it's right along the skin of the pupal skin, and it gives the fly, gives the pupa a distinct silvery glow that really masks its true color. So it looks almost silver, and it's a real key for the trout when the hatch is strong. And it's just proven over the years to be just a fantastic chironomid pattern for me. It's got to be my favorite.
I'm putting one on right now. I know you have one on.
Never leave home without it.
So do you fish the Chromy without an indicator?
Yes, you can, Jack, and it's a favorite method of mine. Hand twist retrieve, or just simply pull the fly back in very slow pulls. Basically, you just want to keep the slack taken up in the line. It's a feel for it. You done it, Jack.
Well, you know, when I was talking, I had that Chromy of yours on, and it was just laying right here by the boat, and I was listening to you talk, and next thing I know, I got a fish on. I don't know what kind of fish it is. It might be a dumb fish, but you know, it was just laying there. Did that Chromy kind of like do that?
Well, yeah, because the chironomids emerge slowly, you know, wiggle and elevate their way up to the surface. So there's lots of rests along that journey. And oh, this is a nice fish, Jack. This is a very nice fish.
Will you quit telling him that?
Well,
you know,
I'm trying to stroke his ego, make him want to come on board.
I know.
Well, that's a very
well,
nice fish.
You know, that was really interesting because we were talking about switching in and doing another fly, and I had that Chromy still on. I've been leaving it on and changing flies underneath it.
Yeah.
And because we know there's always chironomids out there. So your idea of making it really shine and chrome was?
Just make it stand out in the crowd.
Whoa!
I think you've got a very nice fish on here, Jack.
Yes.
I
like when they do that. Like, yeah, come on.
They got
it's
attitude.
Sort of like a jab. I kind of like a fighter. They're jabbing.
Yeah, and then they're going to give you the knockout punch.
Yep.
Do you know how to catch anything other than these big ones, Jack?
Oh, got off.
Oh, he broke away. Well, that's too
Broke
bad.
off on it, and that was my fault. A real bad move on here.
Well, that's all right. We're going to let him go anyway.
Yep.
That was a good fish, too.
Yeah, it was. Ah!
Snapped him? Yeah, he broke.
Broke it.
Yeah, he broke it clean. Dirty dog.
Good fish.
Yes, that was a big fish.
Now we're looking at this next fly, and it's been glittering, and I think trout like humans like shiny bits of metal and beads, and
I call it the crow factor.
and it keeps blinking at me, and I look at that, and what is that? Fly.
That's the redback pheasant, and it's kind of a blend of traditional chironomid materials in pheasant tail and modern materials in holographic mylar, and it's just a red holographic mylar strip tied down the back of the fly and secured in place with the wire rib, and it gives it a kind of as it's in the water, it's somber, then it flashes and glints, and it just sheds light, and it really works well, especially when the big bombers are coming off. Those chironomids I told you about that are 10 to 8, 2x, 3 extra long. This fly really produces well.
Now on chironomids, they take those softly.
A lot of times they do. On those bigger flies, though, they can really belt them sometimes. But you're right, a lot of the times it's a finesse game, slow, painstakingly slow hand twist retrieves, 4 casts an hour, that kind of pace. But it's really challenging. It's a real match to hatch, and it's an addiction. It's hard to describe. Once you're hooked, you're hooked.
Well, let's go to seeing how this fly is tied.
Okay, I'm now going to tie you the redback pheasant, a merger of past materials in pheasant tail and new materials in holographic mylar. I've got a size 10 curved scud pupa hook placed into the jaws of the vise, and I've slid a size 7/64 gold bead onto the hook. I'm going to attach the tying thread directly behind the hook eye, trim away the thread. I'm now going to tie in the gills using the white Stillwater Solutions midge gill material. It's a trilobal soft yarn. It compacts well under thread pressure, and it's ideal for forming gills you can later slide beads over top of. Sometimes Antron or poly yarn, while good alternative materials for gills, they don't compact nearly as nice, and it can be a little challenging at times to get the beads over. On my beaded chironomid patterns, I tend to use size 7/64 beads for size 10 patterns, 3/32 for 12s, 5/64 for 14s, 16s, and smaller. So what I did there is I whip finished the fly directly behind, once the gills are done, directly behind the eye, and trimmed away the thread, and then slid that gold bead forward over the gill tie-in area, and now I'm just going to simply reattach the tying thread directly behind the gold bead. I'm now going to tie in my fine gold wire, and I'm simply going to stab it inside the bead to help position it, and I'm going to bind it in place along the near side of the hook. So I just pull that wire towards me slightly. That helps right the material on the side of the hook, and it won't be slipping and rolling all around all 4 sides of the hook and frustrating you. So I go down into the bend and place that wire material into the material clip. For the body, I'm going to use some of the bleached, dyed over bleached Stillwater Solutions pheasant tail. This is the crimson. It's an excellent color. Maroon is a great color for a chironomid because depending on water conditions and clarity, it can be maroon, it can appear as black, it can appear as brown. It's a good catch-all color that is very, very effective. So what I've done is I've removed say a half a dozen to 8 fibers from the pheasant tail, and I'm tying them in by the tips, and I even the tips by just taking the scissors and trimming them away like this, moisten the ends to help aid the tie-in process. Just going to bind them in by the tips and secure them all the way up the hook shank so that they're well and truly in place. I'm going to take that tying thread once again right up to the back of the bead. Now we're going to take our pheasant tail, and just like the traditional pheasant tail nymph, I'm just going to wind this forward in close touching turns, one right next door to the other. I can overlap the turns ever so slightly, depending on the length of the fibers, to help suggest the taper of the natural chironomids as you get towards the bead. You can see what I'm doing here is I'm using the forefinger of my left hand to make sure that I don't accidentally lose grip on the pheasant tail and have everything kind of come undone. So we get that tied in place, 2 or 3 wraps to tie it off, and then a couple of wraps in front to lock everything down. And then we just trim away the excess. All right, now the red back part. And what we're going to use here is some holographic mylar. I believe this is the 5/32 width. It's the sort of medium size. It comes in 3 widths. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to take this and tie it directly on top of the hook. We're going to trim away this little tag that's sticking up. Make sure it's in place. Don't worry about that falling out of the way right now. And now we're going to secure it in place and rib the fly all in the same motion. So I'm just going to take my fine wire. I'm going to take 1 or 2 turns, and I'm going to wrap this. I'm not counterwinding this. You can counterwind it if you will. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to hold this in place, come over the holographic mylar and bind it down, almost Matuka style, if you will. And the first wrap is key. I'm actually wrapping on the body, not at the base. So I'm actually on the pheasant tail body, and once I get that first wrap in place, the rest of the fly simply flows quite easily. And again, you just want that nice open spacing. I go over the top and I actually apply pressure to secure that wrap of rib in place on the down side. And as I go down, that's when I apply pressure. So any kind of torque that I may place into the material is eliminated. Tie off the wire rib. Use that pulling and twisting motion to break the wire. Sometimes, depending on the wire, it takes a few more wraps, but don't get worried about it. And what we're going to do now is I can trim the mylar even with the bend of the hook. And what that does is it suggests, it's just a different way of suggesting that prominent red butt that so many chironomid pupa feature. Now, to cover up our thread work and help build up the thorax, I'm going to tie in a single strand of peacock herl by the tips. And I'm going to place 2 to 3 wraps of this peacock herl directly behind the gold bead. Tie that off and trim. And again, we're going to secure this by using some brushable fisherman's glue. I'm just going to coat about 3/8 of an inch of the tying thread. And take 2 to 3 wraps and squeeze that into the base of the materials with my wrapping motion, and that'll help further secure and add durability to the fly. Just got one more step after the whip finish here, and that's trimming the gills. So 2 to 3 wraps. And the whip finish in conjunction with the super glue we sort of slid in there helps make a very durable fly. And again, our bead will be our guide for our gill length. We want our gills about the same length as that bead. And there you have it, the red-backed pheasant. Excellent chironomid pupil imitation, especially when big bombers are on the go. I can also tie this a greenback version by using the light olive Stillwater Solutions bleached pheasant and holographic green mylar. So an excellent chironomid pupa pattern, especially on the muddy bottom lakes that are so prominent in western North America.
Today on the lake, the surface water temperature is 62.5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right in the ideal zone for aquatic insects to be emerging, and that's why we're seeing some pretty heavy chironomid emergences. That temperature range between 50 degrees Fahrenheit and about 67, 68 degrees Fahrenheit means there'll be a lot of invertebrate activity, which would include leeches, which would include damselfly nymphs, dragonfly nymphs, mayfly nymphs, and all those different species of insects are also going to emerge according to the water temperature. And the way it usually works, the way it always works, is the chironomids or midges hatch first, and then they're often followed typically by mayflies, which are followed by the damselflies, and then the dragonflies, and then between damsels and dragons, or sometimes at the same time, you'll see the caddis. And then finally in the fall, you'll see a lot more water boatman activity, but that's not more related to water temperature. That's because they're doing their fall swarming and mating for fish. Chironomids or midge pupa. It's with a floating line, a strike indicator, and suspending our flies at various depths within the water column. You have to remember that chironomids, when they emerge from the old larval shuck, they rise vertically up to the water column. The best and most efficient way to fish them first is to place your chironomid pupa patterns within about a foot of the lake bottom. So we need to know the depth of water we're fishing, and that's where a fish finder or a depth sounder is an important fishing tool. If we know the depth we're fishing, we can suspend, using that strike indicator, the chironomid pupil patterns exactly 12 inches off the bottom or 15 inches off the bottom. We want to start at the bottom first. If we're not getting any fish or any strikes, then we work higher in the water column. We can fish with the strike indicator just sitting out in the water and letting the wave action move that bobber up and down. Remember, we've tied those chironomid pupil patterns on with a loop knot, preferably a non-slip loop knot, which allows a lot more action to the fly. Or we can also cast out, wait for the fly to sink vertically till it's in about a foot of the bottom, and then we can start a very, very slow hand twist or strip retrieve, moving the fly ever so slowly. The whole idea of using the strike indicator with chironomids is keeping that pupil pattern in a very precise depth zone where we hope the fish are feeding. And by starting as close to the bottom as possible, we know that's the best place to start, because it's a lot safer for the fish to eat the chironomid pupa closer to the bottom than higher in the water column and closer to the surface, where they're more exposed to predators such as ospreys and loons. The most important factors to consider when you're fishing chironomid pupil patterns is that the fish can be very particular as to what depth they're comfortable feeding at. So for instance, if it was 15 feet deep, those fish might only want to eat the pupa between 14 feet and 13 and a half feet, or between 14 feet and 13 feet. And if you're below it or above it, you may not get near the action that someone else sitting right next to you or even in the same boat is fishing. They're just in the zone and you're not. When we do the slow hand twist retrieves, it just provides a little more action to the flies while still maintaining the fly in the depth zone that you want to keep that fly in. There's a fish. Oh yeah. Yeah, beautiful fish. Just catching up to it. It's great to have large arbor reels on any fishing situation, certainly here when they go way out in the back and you've got to try to catch up to them. Oh, yeah, it's a nice fish. That's a beautiful rainbow. Ate the chironomid. Just tells you that it's just good to show that nice sized fish, big fish will eat small food items. Simply because, again, there's so many of these pupa in the water column. And it's an easy meal. Get the net ready. There we go. Okay, so got the fish here and we'll just give you a quick look at him. It's a well-conditioned rainbow. And I'll just let her go. It's a beautiful fish. So fishing chironomid pupil patterns, catch fish like that, you know they're good to, you know it's a great pattern to use.
Well, again, good color combinations, good looking fly. Okay, we're going now to a midge pattern. You call this the red-green, like named after the famous Canadian television show?
This is a chironomid larva, or what we often refer to as bloodworms. But chironomid larvae come in two common colors, maroonish red and then shades of green, usually a medium light to light olive green. And There are chironomid species or midge species out there that the larval stage is two-tone, candy cane green and red, and this pattern is a good representation of that.
Almost a Christmas larva.
Well, like a Christmas tree. Well, I have a Christmas tree pupa too, but we thought we'd show the larva today.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, let's take it away with the red-green midge larva.
Sounds good. Chironomids or midges have a complete life cycle: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. I'm going to tie the larval stage of a midge or a chironomid. The fly I'm tying now, I call the green and red midge larva. So it's actually a larva that has both, it's bicolored red and green, and it can be quite common, particularly in western still waters, and they can get quite large. The hook I have in the vise today is a curved nymph hook, a 10-3X, so it has a slight bend in the shank. And that's just to give a little, you never see a straight larva in the water. They're always wiggling, so they always have some shape to them. I've got a 1/8 inch silver lined glass bead, which I've slid up to the eye of the hook. And then I'm going to be tying in A-dot red pre-waxed tying thread. And I'm just going to form a base. The flashabou is going to be the underbody. We can have a couple strands of that. And then it's going to be ribbed with Stillwater Solutions midge stretch floss in the bright red color. And then there'll be a secondary rib of fine silver wire. The first step is we're going to just lay a foundation of the silver wire down. Should be the final rib. And then the first rib will be the bright red stretch floss. And again, I'm gonna tie that in behind the bead. I'm just using the material to build the body up a bit. So I have our two ribs. I'm gonna take a few strands of the lime green flashabou. And I find it's sometimes using flashabou to wet it a bit to calm it down and get it to lay down on the hook a little easier. So again, I'm going to lay this down right behind, tied in right behind the bead as well. And bring my tying thread back to the bend of the hook, and then forward again. And then we'll take our flashabou, and we're going to just build the underbody. So midge larvae live at the bottom of the lake. They live in little tubes in the bottom area, and they feed on detritus or decomposing vegetation that passes by. Most midge larvae, or most midges in general, have a 1-year life cycle, but there are some species particularly, and it's usually the larger species like this fly is imitating, can live for up to 2 years in the larval stage before they're going to emerge as the pupa and then finally as the adult. So it's not uncommon in extremely productive still waters to see midge larvae that are in excess of 3/4 of an inch in length, so they can get quite large. And that's what this fly is imitating. So I'm just going to take my red midge stretch floss and give it a rib. 5 to 7 wraps would be good. Bring that up to the bead. Tie that off. And you notice I've got some tension on this rib, so you've got to make sure you counterwind it to lock it in from behind and then in front. Because as soon as I release the tension, she's going to want to come back. And then the last step will be to take our fine silver wire and just lay down this rib in front of the ribs that we just laid down of the mid-stretch floss. Now we're going to be fishing these flies close to the bottom because that's where they live, in those tubes at the bottom. And so a couple ways to fish this would be with full floating lines and varying lengths of leader so that we can get the leader long enough so the fly will sink to the bottom of the lake, and then we can slowly retrieve it or inch it in just above the lake bottom. So typically the majority of chironomid larvae in lakes are living in 25 feet of water or less, so that's why we can use that full floating line. The second way to fish this is under a strike indicator and just suspending it 6 inches, 4 inches off the lake bottom. And an excellent situation would be to have a slight ripple on the water, quartering a cast out to the side and letting the indicator end fly just drift downwind, just up and down, undulating just over the lake bottom. And when you're wind drifting any flies under a strike indicator, whether they're midge larvae, midge pupae, leeches, baby damselfly nymphs, things like that, you want to be using a loop knot, a small loop knot, either a Duncan loop or like a 97% loop knot, so that loop allows that fly to pivot that much more realistically. So that's a great little tip to really increase the chance of catching a fish. So I'm just going to use the whip finisher now and finish the fly off, like so. So there you have the completed midge larvae. It's bright because it's got the two colors in it, but it's a good color combination that when you look closely in many lakes, you'll see that color.
What I love about fly tying is some of the names that are given. I just took a very quick look and all I saw was pregnant. And I'm going to let you pronounce this one since you're a biologist and tell us what this is all about. This has obviously got to be a scud of some type.
That's right. This fly pattern, Jack, is called the pregnant gamma shrimp, or scud. So shrimp mate numerous times a year. The females with eggs, they hold a cluster of eggs under the underside of their thorax. Trout are not colorblind, and we all know trout can get quite specific in their feeding patterns, and it's very common for trout to feed only on pregnant female shrimp. And we know this by doing throat samples or through lots of years doing stomach samples. When I was at work, you would do a diet analysis of a fish, and every shrimp in the gut of the fish was a pregnant female. So we tie specific patterns to imitate that orangey reddish brood patch of eggs.
Sounds like they practice population control.
The trout do the thinning.
Well, let's take a look at the scud pattern. I don't think you can have too many scud patterns. They're a fly that's really, as you know from being in the States, we literally love. And there's about every color on earth that a scud can have.
Exactly, and you know, scuds or shrimp, they are truly the bread and butter food source of our productive still waters. Without them, well, put it this way.
They wouldn't put on weight, would they?
That's right. Every good productive still water has a good foundation or population of scuds.
Or freshwater shrimp, as
there you go.
People know. Let's take it away with this innovative pattern.
Shrimp or scuds are a real staple food source of trout in productive still waters. There's basically two very common species of scuds we'll see in our lakes. Hyalella, which are very small, reach about 1/8 of an inch in length, and then their larger cousins called the gamma shrimp. They can reach almost 5/8 and even 3/4 of an inch in length when they're fully extended and swimming through the water. I'm going to show you how to tie a pregnant gamma shrimp pattern. Now, the reason why I want to get that specific, tying a pregnant female with eggs, is because trout are not colorblind, and they'll actually select just the gammas females with an egg sac, a bright orange egg sac of eggs, and they'll just select them out of the maze of millions or trillions of scuds that are swimming around in the water. And we know this by doing throat pumps, or if you did a stomach analysis of a fish, you would see oftentimes 300 or 400 scuds in the stomach of a fish, and they're all just females with an egg sac. And so that's why we're tying this fly. The hook I'm using today is a curved shrimp pupa hook. It's got the nice curved back to give a bit of an arc to the back of the shrimp. I'm using 8/0 olive tying thread. The material for this fly will be Stillwater Solutions soft blend in dark olive, and I'll be using some fine bright orange dubbing for the egg sac, and then as we tie it later, the shellback of this fly will be Stillwater Solutions midge flex, the 1-inch diameter wide in olive, and that will be the shellback. And we'll finish the fly off with some silver wire, fine silver wire, or pardon me, fine gold wire for the ribbing. So to start the fly off, I've tied my tying thread in, and I'm just forming a tying base down the hook. I'm just going to tie in my final rib of gold wire, tuck that aside, and then I'm going to take my midge flex, which is stretchy, and that will be the shellback in the end. So I'm just going to tie that down the shank of the hook as well. So that'll be the side. And we're going to take our soft blend dubbing now, and we're going to put a little bit of dubbing wax on our tying thread, like so. So just put some wax there. Our soft blend, and I'm just going to form a little dubbing. And so I'm not putting on a lot of dubbing. I'm trying to keep it fairly thin because we can always add more as we tie the fly. And by putting smaller amounts on, we can control the shape of the fly a lot better. So I'm just going to take the dubbing now and wind her up. I'm going to go about 2/3 the way up the body of the fly to about there, and then I'm going to put a bit more wax on. So, and then I'm going to take some of this bright orange diamond dub that's going to imitate a brood pouch, the egg sac or brood pouch. Eggs, dub that in there, like so. Get that in there, and then I'm just going to tie that in, fairly prominent, like so. I'm just going to get rid of that little tag in, and then I'm just going to slide a bit more of my olive soft blend up that to finish the fly off, like so. And that'll be good. Then I'm going to take our shellback and pull her tight over the back of the fly, and under pressure, by stretching it, I'm just going to tie it down like so. And again, wind on both sides of it so it's locked in. Otherwise, it'll let go on you. Cut that off. And then I'm going to go back and get my fine gold wire, and I'm going to add a rib to the fly. So, and tie that off.
talk a little bit about
Now,
when they're pregnant?
yeah. Now, once I finish the fly and tie it off, I'm going to have to take a dubbing brush, and or a needle, and I'm going to be picking out the legs of this fly. So I'm just going to now take a little bodkin, like so, a little needle. And this takes a little while. You got to do it carefully. It's going to form. But what we're doing here is using it to pick the legs out. Shrimp are a great pattern to use in the spring and in the fall. Trout can eat them every day of the year if they want to, because they're always there. Because they don't hatch necessarily at specific times of year. They mate 9-10 times a year. But trout really like to eat them early in the spring, late in the fall, when there's less other food sources available. So we call it a bread and butter food source. And you always want to have some of these in your box. You don't often see free swimming shrimp in a lake. That's because those ones get picked off by trout right away. Where they live and where they seek cover is in and amongst the benthic or emergent vegetation that grows off the shoal or the littoral zone of the lake. They swim in and out of that stuff, trying to keep under cover from any cruising trout that might want to eat them. So that tells us that we want to fish shrimp patterns close to the bottom or close to some vegetations or some structure where they can seek hiding places. So we often use slow or intermediate sinking lines to fish shrimp patterns, or you could use a shrimp pattern, a floating line, and a long leader. And sometimes we'll put soft putty lead or non-toxic putty lead on our leader to help sink that fly a little quicker to get it down there. And we're going to be fishing 4 to 6 inch long, medium, slow strip retrieve to bring the shrimp back to your boat. So now that I've teased out the legs, I'm just going to take my tying scissors and kind of I'm going to trim the legs so that none of the legs are hanging any longer or below the barb of the hook, and that way the fly's going to swim properly in the water. So there we have a pregnant Gamera shrimp, and we'll just have a quick look at that finished fly. So you have to have the patience to slow your retrieves down. There's no point in doing 12 to 20 inch fast strips when you're trying to imitate a chironomid pupa. That's not how they swim, and you're going to be unsuccessful. So you need patience. Secondly, when you're fishing out of a boat or even out of a pontoon boat, you want to make sure you have complete control over your retrieves. That means double anchoring, an anchor out the bow, an anchor out the stern. That way, when the wind shifts direction, your boat's not going to move, and you're going to maintain control of your retrieves. Third, a very common mistake we see is that even before you get out on the water, take 30 seconds to a minute to straighten out your monofilament leader. Get the coil, get the memory out of the butt section of your leader so that when you lay a cast down, you've got a straight line connection between your fly rod, your fly line, your leader, and your fly. It's very frustrating to be fishing with a slinky or a number of coils in your leader because you're going to get a strike and not even detect it. And fourth, when we're actually doing the fishing situations on the lake, it's much more efficient to be holding your rod tip down on the water. Your rod tip should be within 6 inches or right in the surface film of the lake, not held up on a 45-degree angle. If you do that, you're going to have a belly in your line and you're going to miss a strike. Again, we want to have a straight line connection as possible between your fly rod, your fly line, your leader, and your fly. So keep the tip of your rod right on the water. If you just thought about those 4 tips there, it would immensely improve your success rate on any waters you plan to fish. Today on the lake, the surface water temperature is 62.5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is right in the ideal zone for aquatic insects to be emerging, and that's why we're seeing some pretty heavy chironomid emergences. That temperature range between 50 degrees Fahrenheit and about 67, 68 degrees Fahrenheit means there'll be a lot of invertebrate activity, which would include leeches, which would include damselfly nymphs, dragonfly nymphs, mayfly nymphs, and all those different species of insects are also going to emerge according to the water temperature. And the way it usually works, the way it always works, is the chironomids or midges hatch first, and then they're often followed typically by mayflies, which are followed by the damselflies, and then the dragonflies, and then between damsels and dragons, or sometimes at the same time, you'll see the caddis. And then finally in the fall, you'll see a lot more water boatman activity, but that's not more related to water temperature. That's because they're doing their fall swarming and mating flights. Barometric pressure is one of those discussion points that there's many diverse opinions on how it affects fish and their activity levels. I think it's safe to say that when you have stable or rising barometer, that means the weather is going to be stable. And if you look at animals in general, like wildlife, they're much more active when the barometric pressure is stable or rising. Similarly, in the aquatic environment, when you have a stable or rising barometer, things are pretty good. Insects are hatching and fish are generally happy. What happens when the barometric pressure declines rapidly? That it tells us that there's a storm coming in, and there could be some issues with barometric pressure affecting subsurface or aquatic insect and fish life. I guess it's safe to say that when the barometer is falling or crashing, oftentimes the fishing is poor. And again, there's many variables why that's happening, but that's pretty well a statement of fact and something we have to live with as anglers. Water temperature is a key environmental factor that any fly fisher needs to understand. Water temperature dictates oxygen levels in the water. The cooler the water, the more oxygen it's going to support. Also, water temperature dictates when insects emerge. It's all based on water temperature. And so a good temperature for most situations to consider is that if the surface temperature of a lake is around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you know the water's warm enough for major insect emergencies to occur. Conversely, in the mid or warm parts of the summer, when the surface temperatures of the lake reach in excess of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you know that their fish are going to be uncomfortable because there's going to be a lot less oxygen in the water. And those warm days when the water gets that warm, that's when the angler really has to consider, if you're fishing and you're catching fish, you want to play them quickly, get them into the net, release them as soon as you can, because you don't want to put them into any more stress than they already are in when trying to live or survive in that warmer water. Lakes go through seasonal changes: spring, summer, fall, and winter. This is really critical information for the stillwater fly fisher to understand, because the different seasons of the lake dictate where the trout can live in different parts of the lake. So let's take a quick look at what happens in a lake at different times of the year. Let's start in the middle of winter. In a lot of north temperate lakes in North America, small lakes freeze over. So there's a covering ice for 3 to 5 months of the year. There's things that happen under the ice that determine where fish can live. And one of the biggest factors we need to consider is that in many of these productive still waters, prior to freeze up, there's been a lot of aquatic plant growth. When a lake is covered with ice and snow, those plants can no longer photosynthesize, so they die off and they start decomposing. The decomposition process of all that vegetation gobbles up oxygen during the winter months. And so in many, many situations, there's not a lot of oxygen in a lake during the winter months. So now we've got a lake it's this deep, it's got a layer of ice on it, and we've got some oxygen below the ice, but close to the bottom, the oxygen is gradually decreasing as the winter months progress. The day the ice comes off a lake, there's this much oxygenated water, and then below there is very poorly oxygenated water, and in some situations, not enough oxygen to support fish life. So now we have the ice off the lake, we have a band of oxygenated water, and then we have the rest of the volume of the lake with less oxygen. We have a situation in the spring that's called spring turnover that these small lakes go through. And what this means is that as the surface layers of the water warm up so that they're the similar temperature as the bottom layers, the surface waters will sink or mix. You add a bit of wind and you get what we call a spring turnover, where the entire water column mixes. The surface waters are pushed down to the bottom waters come up to the surface. A lake that was previously very clear, when it turns over, will get quite murky. You'll see a lot of detritus or decayed composition matter floating in the water column, and it'll be dirty. That's a spring turnover. The thing you have to remember about a spring turnover is that we still have that layer of oxygenated water now mixing with the entire water column. And at turnover, the entire water column has a reduced amount of oxygen throughout it. And that can be stressful for the fish, and that's why fishing at turnover, when a lake is in turn, will not be very good. Within 5 to 10 days after a turnover event, the water will clear up. It will continue to mix, but now there's lots of oxygenated water. The fish are happy, and also the completion of spring turnover also coincides with warmer water temperatures and the observation or the start of the first insect hatches of the year, which are the midges or chironomids. So we've gotten through the spring turnover. We're well into spring. We've got lots of insect hatches occurring. We now enter the summer period where we have some warm air temperatures. Lakes will stratify in the summertime. That means the upper layers of the water will get warm. The lower depths will not warm up. That's because the sun's energy can only penetrate to a certain depth in the water column. We also get algae blooms on a lot of lakes, blue-green algae blooms, and they photosynthesize during the day and they respire at night. So during the day, all these little green dots of algae, or they look like grass clippings in the water, they're photosynthesizing and putting oxygen in the lake. But unfortunately at night, they respire and they strip oxygen out of the water. So you might have heard the term of summer kill, and that's typically what happens when you have a summer kill, is that you have a massive blue-green algae bloom on the lake. At night they respire, and those fish that are in the shallow portions of the lake get trapped, and they get trapped in water that is rapidly losing its oxygen, and they die. They get disorientated and they die. In the standard scenario, we'll have a blue-green algae bloom. It dissipates in the fall, because in the fall we have less sunlight, water's cooling down, the blue-greens die off because they're not getting enough sunlight, water temperatures are cooling down. We get to a point where the surface temperatures now cool down to where they're as cold as the lower depths of the lake, and we'll get another turnover, and that's called fall turnover. The lake will get dirty again. It'll clear up 5 to 10 days later, and it's from that fall to the completion of fall turnover till freeze up is when you have some of the best fishing of the year, because the water temperatures are cooling, the entire water column is saturated with oxygen, and those big fish will come into that shallow water again to feed heavily prior to winter. They want to put on as much body fat as they can, because remember, trout are cold-blooded, and when a lake is covered with ice and we have cool winter temperatures, they become very lethargic, or they use minimal amounts of energy to search out food. So they want to feed aggressively prior to the winter period coming and the ice cover. So that completes the complete annual cycle of a lake. It's definitely a subject worth exploring more in detail, and that means reading some books to get more information so that you fully understand what's occurring on your favorite still water. So guys, I know it's last light. You want to get the last bite before we have to get off the water. Fish are still sipping on those chironomids, but this is also a good time to give them something big and ugly. And leeches are a great choice. Naturally, leeches are undulating, swimming sinusoidally through the water. But in this situation or circumstances, what I would do is I'd be casting those leeches right into a foot of water, right on the bank, pulling them perpendicular away from the bank, moving that leech and showing it or presenting it to as many fish that are cruising parallel to the bank, back and forth as much as possible. And I'd be putting on something ugly, a lot of flashaboo, something bright and flashy. I'd have a bead head or a cone head, maybe even a fluorescent orange cone head on there, so that that fly with a loop knot is dipping and diving. And I'd be shaking up that retrieve, stripping fast, pausing, stripping fast, pausing. Something that they don't normally swim at that rate, but you're trying to attract the attention of the most aggressive fish that might be cruising the bank. Damselflies and dragonflies are members of the insect Odonata. They're both important trout food sources. The reason why they're important is that they have a multi-year life cycle in terms of the larval. Sorry, just do that over. Okay. Damselflies and dragonflies are members of the insect order Odonata. They're both available as trout food sources year-round. That's because the nymphal or larval stages of the insects live for several years in the nymphal stage. And so the trout can eat them in the middle of winter or the middle of summer. However, they're most important food sources when they're actually migrating to emerge as adults. So let's take a closer look at damselflies. The damselfly nymphs live amongst the bottom vegetation that is living in the vegetation. Damselfly nymphs live in the vegetation that grows off the bottom and up off the bottom along the shoal or littoral zones of the lake. They feed on shrimp, zooplankton, mayfly nymphs, things like that. So the trout are going to come into that shallower water, 20 feet and less, to feed on those nymphs as they're immature. When the damselfly nymph is fully developed, and this is usually late spring, early summer, the nymphs will swim off the bottom of the lake up to within 2 or 3 feet of the lake surface. Then they'll swim horizontally until they reach some long stem bulrush or cattails. The nymphs will crawl up the stems of those plants and they'll emerge as the adult damselfly. It's during that emergent swim that the trout really get aggressive and hunt down those insects. And it makes sense because when there's an emergence, there's lots of them in the water column. And that's what keys the fish to feed on them. Similarly, dragonfly nymphs live in the same habitat in the vegetation at the bottom of the lake as the damselfly nymphs. Dragonfly nymphs can live for up to 5 years in the nymphal stage, and they're the top predator of the insect world down below. They're feeding on anything smaller than themselves, including damselfly nymphs. When a dragonfly nymph is fully developed, and this is usually happens after the damselfly nymphs in terms of timing in the summer months, the nymphs will crawl along the bottom of the lake and up out of the lake. So they crawl and swim or scoot along the bottom and then out of the water, right onto the shore of the lake, and then they climb up some emergent vegetation such as bulrush or pine trees or alder trees that are inside the lake. A split forms in the back of the thorax of that dragonfly nymph, and the adult crawls out, fills its wings with fluid, and eventually flies away. So when dragonfly nymphs are emerging, there's lots of them. And again, that's what keys the interest of the trout. There's hundreds and hundreds or thousands of these dragonfly nymphs crawling along the bottom of the lake and out of the water. And again, it's a great food source. They're available year-round as nymphs, just like the damselflies, but both for damsels and dragonflies, the most intense feeding is during their migration crawls or swims to emerge into the adult phase. Trout love to eat damselfly nymphs. whether it's the immature stages of the nymph or the mature damselfly nymph. Mature damselfly nymphs, those are nymphs that are fully developed, swim off the bottom of the lake, off the shoal of the liver zone in shallow water, and they swim up to about 3 feet below the surface of the lake. Then they swim towards shore or towards some emergent vegetation like this grass that's growing here. The nymphs crawl up out of the water onto the grass. So this is a perfect situation where I am right now. I'm using a slow, clear, intermediate sinking line, and I'm just fishing a damselfly nymph as it would imitate it swimming towards the grass to emerge. So I'm just using a nice continuous hand strip retrieve, not too fast, and then always interspersing 2 or 3 quick pulls just to add a little bit of different action to the fly. So the nymph is swimming, I'm retrieving the fly in the direction that the real nymphs would be swimming. Nice continuous hand strip retrieve. So, and then the odd quick pull. Okay. Now, when you're out on the water, you'll know that there's damselflies migrating because you'll see the nymphs in the water, and they'll be swimming sinusoidally, and you want to make sure you figure out which direction they're swimming because you want to be casting the same direction where you're casting out and then retrieving your fly in the same direction that the real nymphs are swimming. Dragonflies are another excellent food source of rainbow trout. Not only do trout feed on dragonflies in the juvenile nymphal stages, because dragonflies can live for up to 5 years as a nymph before they mature. Trout really like to eat the dragonfly nymphs when they're fully matured and they're crawling along the edge of along the bottom of the lake to crawl right out of the water to emerge. So you'll have these massive migrations of mature dragonfly nymphs crawling from the bottom of the lake in 5 to 20 feet of water and then climbing right out of the water onto some vegetation along the shoreline of the lake, whether it's a tree or shrubs or grasses. Those nymphs, their exoskeleton will dry up and the adult dragonfly will crawl out of that shuck and fly away. It's those big migrations of the nymphs that really get the trout excited. So when we're trying to imitate that migration of dragonfly nymphs, we're using full sinking lines, like this intermediate sinking line or a type 2 fast sinking line, waiting for enough time for our dragonfly nymph to sink to the bottom of the shoal, and then starting a slow but steady hand strip retrieve. Moving the dragonfly nymph in the same direction as the real ones are crawling toward shore. Shrimp, or better known as scuds, are one of the most common food sources of trout in still waters. They're a bread and butter food source. All productive lakes that support big populations or big fish, all of them have freshwater shrimp in them. They're a staple food source available year-round for trout to feed on. Shrimp live in the vegetation that grows on the shoal or the littoral zone of the lake. That's the zone of the lake at the bottom, maximum depth is about 20 to 25 feet, oftentimes 15 feet or less, because the sun has to penetrate to the bottom of the lake to grow the vegetation, to photosynthesize. So we're fishing relatively shallow water, 20, 25 feet and less. One of the best lines to fish shrimp is a clear, intermediate, or slow sinking line, because we want the fly to be sinking, getting it down to within about 1 foot off the bottom and retrieving it. So we take our slow or intermediate sinking line, we're going to cast out, and we're going to wait. We have to wait or do a countdown so that we know our fly is close to the bottom of the lake. So, for instance, intermediate sinking lines sink at about 1.5 inches per second. We'll know the depth we're fishing because we're using a depth sounder, or we know, or by looking at a contour map. So we're going to wait enough time for that fly to sink to the bottom. Once it's down within 1 foot of the bottom, we're going to start a continuous but steady hand twist retrieve. Okay, and we're going to intersperse it with 2 or 3 quick pulls. Shrimp don't swim continuously. They pause, they take a break, catch their breath, and then scamper along again. They'll pause, scamper, and pause. And that's what we're trying to do with a hand twist retrieve, pause, couple quick pulls, hand twist retrieve. Okay. Shrimp come in a variety of colors. They're not all dark olive green. They all match the color of the habitat they're living in. And so we want to pay close attention to the shrimp that are in a particular lake. Scoop them up, see what they look like, see what the color they are, and see the size that they are, because they'll vary in size. And you want to match as closely what you have in your fly box as what's in the water. Water boatmen are another important food source to understand, because trout do feed on them. Water boatmen are most available to trout early in the spring, prior to any insect emergencies, because the water's too cold. Water boatmen survive through the winter, and they'll survive under the ice, even though they're air breathers, because when a lake freezes over, there's lots of air pockets. It's not like a smooth sheet of glass on top of the ice. Where water boatmen are really important as well is in the early fall, when the adult water boatmen go on swarming and mating flights. They'll fly from one body of water to another one. The females will dive bomb into the water, dive down, deposit eggs, and then swim back up. Water boatmen, air breathers. They have a third pair of elongated legs that are oar-shaped, hence their name, and they rapidly swim through the water. When water boatmen hit the surface, they momentarily are stunned, they get orientated, and then they dive down to the bottom, swim down, deposit eggs, and then swim back up. So the retrieve you'd use, and we're using full sinking lines, is to imitate the dive down and the dive back up. We'd use like a type 2 or a type 3 regular sinking line, not a density compensated line, because we want the sinking line to form a belly in itself when we cast it out. We cast it out as far as we can. We wait 15 to 35, 40 seconds for a nice belly to form in the line, and then we start a continuous, quick 3 to 5 inch hand strip retrieve, just like that. And every once in a while we'll pause and then pick the retrieve up again. So we're bringing the fly down, and then we're bringing the fly back up. You'll see that boatmen are hitting the water because it'll be a nice, typically calm, early afternoon day in the early to mid-fall, and you'll see raindrops hitting the water. And that's the boatmen that are flying back and diving down into the water. A good fly to use, always to have some in your fly box, and again, we'll know that they're around because we'll see them hitting the water. Caddis flies, or sedges, provide some of the greatest dry fly fishing you'll find in still waters. It's those big caddis that the pupa swims up to the surface of the lake, the adult crawls out of the shuck, scampers across the surface of the water, and you get these explosive strikes from really aggressively feeding fish. So we can get some great dry fly fishing with adult caddis patterns using things like Goddard sedges, Bicolux sedges, Tom Thumbs, patterns like that. What's more important though is to have a good pupil pattern, the caddis pupil pattern, the pupa that's swimming from the bottom of the lake to the surface lake to hatch. The mature caddis pupa breaks out of the old caddis larvae tube at the bottom of the lake that's been sitting at the bottom of the shoal or the littoral zone. Breaks out of that tube, or the old case, and then quickly swims to the surface of the lake. We want to imitate that swim with like an intermediate or slow sinking line, casting out as far as we can, letting the caddis pupil pattern sink to the bottom, and then we're doing 4 to 8 inch, fairly quick strip retrieves, bringing that fly right to the surface of the lake. We can also use a full floating line, a long leader, and a caddis pupa pattern, and imitate that same retrieve up through the water column. These are my thoughts on the ABCs of fishing chironomid pupa with a strike indicator. That is the easiest method to learn and to be the most successful fishing chironomids. A strike indicator allows you to present a chironomid pupil pattern at a very precise depth zone in the lake. For instance, if we are anchored in 15 feet of water, there's the depth, surface of the lake, bottom of the lake, 15 feet deep. As an angler, we don't know where in that 15 feet of water the trout are feeding Are they feeding at 14.5 feet, at 14 feet, between 11 and 12 feet? And unfortunately, trout can be very specific in the depth zone they want to eat. That's just fishing. So we have to approach fishing with the indicator a bit scientifically. We want to start off by suspending our chironomid pupil patterns about 6 to 12 inches off the bottom. That's the first place we want to start fishing them. If we're not catching fish there, we're going to move our indicator lower so that we're 14, just hanging down 14 feet, so a foot off the bottom, and then we'll try 13 feet, and then we'll try 12 feet. And in some cases, they may be eating those chironomid pupa 5 feet under the surface. That's not the common situation. It's usually deeper, but we have to be prepared to try it. So we don't want to go out onto the water and just peg the indicator at a depth and not even think about it. We want to think about the distance we're fishing and then work progressively up in the water column.
Talk about the drift of it.
Okay. All right.
Anytime, please.
Okay. The typical situation for presenting chironomid pupil patterns under an indicator is we're in our anchored boat or fishing craft. We cast downwind. You don't have to cast 90 feet. It can only be 30 feet. Remember, you have to be able to see that indicator go down. And sometimes it doesn't go boink and disappear. Sometimes it just quivers, or sometimes it just goes down 1/4 of an inch and pops back up. So you have to be able to see the indicator. That's the typical situation. There could be all kinds of fish swimming right under our boats, but we can't see them. So you can often catch fish 10 feet from the boat. Another excellent situation to use a strike indicator with the chironomid pupil patterns is when we get a gentle breeze on the water. Just a nice little riffle. It's a fisherman's riffle. You cast out or quarter a cast out to the side of your boat, let a belly form in your line, a gentle belly, and let the wind push your indicator downwind. That indicator is bobbing up and down, which means our chironomid pupil pattern is up and down. It's wiggling like this up and down, which they do naturally. Use that in combination with a non-slip loop knot or a Duncan loop knot, and you've got an effective, very subtle way of presenting a real chironomid pupil pattern. Egg-laden female chironomids like to come back to lakes in the late evenings when the water's calm to lay their eggs. And under the ideal situation, those fish will track, or you'll see a fish rise here, and then it's going to come up again and again. When you can see they're taking a track, and you can present a fly ahead of that moving fish. In the worst scenario, the fish is rising here, it's rising there, and there's no pattern to its movement. And that can be pretty frustrating, trying to present stripping a egg-laden female imitation in front of him, because you don't know where he's going to be. What I would do in that situation is throw out the ugliest leech you've got, the flashiest one, and strip it across through the water, and hopefully in front of someone's face, a big trout, and just give them a dessert item that happens to be swimming by.
Perfect. That's exactly what.
Stand by.
So Jack, if I came upon, sorry,
Phil and Jack?
Phil and Jack, or Jack and Phil.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So Jack and Phil, if I came upon the situation where we had great big chironomid bombers laying eggs, that means the female's dipping the tip of her abdomen in the surface film, it's flat calm out, you see the V wake, those fish are gulping, they're coming up, they're just showing the tops of their heads, and they're sipping them down. Ideally, we'd be putting on a bigger dry fly, probably lower profile one, not too bushy, casting ahead of an individual fish that's cruising, because you can see it's marking its lanes, you can see it's going to come up ahead, and stripping it long strips, long 12 to 16 inch strips, so that your fly's making a V wake, and you're intercepting those flies. You're bringing the fly across the face of a fish so he sees it. He sees the silhouette on the surface of the water. That would be the ideal situation and tactics to use. All three chironomid or midge pupa are fished the same method. The easiest way to learn how to fish chironomids or midge pupa is with a floating line, a strike indicator, and suspending our flies at various depths within the water column. You have to remember that chironomids, when they emerge from the old larval shuck, they rise vertically up to the water column. The best and most efficient way to fish them first is to place your chironomid pupa patterns within about a foot of the lake bottom. So we need to know the depth of water we're fishing, and that's where a fish finder or depth sounder is an important fishing tool. If we know the depth we're fishing, we can suspend, using that strike indicator, the chironomid pupil patterns exactly 12 inches off the bottom or 15 inches off the bottom. We want to start at the bottom first. If we're not getting any fish or any strikes, then we work higher in the water column. We can fish with the strike indicator just sitting out in the water and letting the wave action move that bobber up and down. Remember, we've tied those chironomid pupil patterns on with a loop knot, preferably a non-slip loop knot, which allows a lot more action to the fly. Or we can also cast out, wait for the fly to sink vertically till it's in about a foot of the bottom, and then we can start a very, very slow hand twist or strip retrieve, moving the fly ever so slowly. The whole idea of using the strike indicator with chironomids is keeping that pupil pattern in a very precise depth zone where we hope the fish are feeding. And by starting as close to the bottom as possible, we know that's the best place to start because it's a lot safer for the fish to eat the chironomid pupa closer to the bottom than higher in the water column and closer to the surface where they're more exposed to predators such as ospreys and loons. It's pretty slow. This is a painfully slow hand twist retrieve. But remember, we don't want to be really moving it too fast horizontally because the real chironomid pupa are rising vertically up to the water column. This is just covering a little bit more water, but the fly is staying in the same depth zone because the strike indicator is suspending it at that depth. There's other ways to fish with chironomid pupil limitations. And the reason why we focus so much time on fishing with the pupa is that there's so many chironomids emerging at one time. It's not a small hatch. There's literally hundreds of thousands of them that are coming up, rising up through the water column at any one hatch. And what we have to determine when we're out on the water is the size and color of the pupa that are emerging, because we're hoping that that's the color and size that the trout are actually feeding on. So ideally, we're going to be looking into the water to see the shucks, see the pupa as they come up to the surface of the lake. We're going to pick them up and look at the size and color. Or alternatively, you could do a throat pump of a fish and just suck out the last few live food items that are in the esophagus of or the throat of the fish and get an idea of exactly what size and color they're feeding on. Because trout will switch from one color and size to another color and size and then switch back and forth. And there could be 5 or 10 different species of chironomids emerging all at the same time. So there's 5 or 10 different species, and all we have to know is that there's different sizes and colors coming off at the same time. And chironomid emergencies typically happen from mid-morning to late afternoon. And by that time, by late afternoon, in many cases, the fish are full and they've eaten enough of them and they're not going to bite anymore. They're not as aggressively feeding. So you have about a 5 to 7 hour window to figure out what's going on in terms of the hatch, what size, what color they are, and try to figure out at what depth the fish are feeding on the pupa. In most chironomid pupil fishing situations, especially when you're fishing with floating lines with strike indicators or floating lines and long leaders with a sinking fly, that's without an indicator, the takes are often very soft. That's why you have to keep an eye on that strike indicator or watch your line or have the line in your hands at all times. Because if you think about it, the pupa are just rising up through the water column. They're everywhere. The trout are just swimming through, in and out, weaving in and out of those pupa, and every time they breathe in, they're going to take in 2, 3, or 4 more of these chironomid pupa. So the trout expend minimal energy, and they're not actually chasing the flies. The only time that would differ is that you can also fish chironomid pupa with full sinking lines, from slow sinking to really fast sinking lines, extra fast sinking lines. Generally, we do that when the water's between 17, 18 feet and 35, 40 feet. So for instance, if we were out on a lake and it was 30 feet deep, we saw the shucks on the water, we see the pupa wiggling up through the water column. We anchor, our sounder tells us it's 30 feet. An effective way to fish there is then with a full sinking line, like a type 3 full sinker, 9-foot leader, tie on the chironomid pupil pattern, cast out 30 feet, allow that 30 feet of fly line to sink totally vertically, straight up and down, and then once it's straight up and down, start that slow, continuous hand strip retrieve, bringing that fly up through the water column. And at some point, whether it's a couple feet off the bottom or perhaps 10 feet below the surface, is where the fish are going to grab the fly. And in that fishing situation, oftentimes the strike is really hard because the fish are swimming and they come down on the fly. They're actually seeing the chironomid pupa escape from them, so they really chase them and hit the fly very hard. Otherwise, in most situations, it's a very soft take. The indicator sometimes will just barely move. Other times it'll go right under quickly, but you have to keep an eye on that strike indicator. I'd like to review some of the more common mistakes that I've seen being made by the beginner stillwater fly fisher. First of all, stillwater fly fishing, because we're fishing water that isn't moving, we don't know where those fish are living, and it requires a lot more patience to think about what you're doing and how you're representing those flies. The fish have a lot of time to see those flies. It's not as if they're zipping by in the current. So we have to pay particular attention on how we provide the lifelike movement to the flies that we're fishing. Most of these flies, or most of the food sources of trout in still waters, swim fairly slowly or don't even swim at all. So you have to have the patience to slow your retrieves down. There's no point in doing 12 to 20 inch fast strips when you're trying to imitate a chironomid pupa. That's not how they swim, and you're going to be unsuccessful. So you need patience. Secondly, when you're fishing out of a boat or even out of a pontoon boat, you want to make sure you have complete control over your retrieves. That means double anchoring, an anchor out the bow, an anchor out the stern. That way, when the wind shifts direction, your boat's not going to move, and you're going to maintain control of your retrieves. Third, a very common mistake we see is that even before you get out on the water, take 30 seconds to a minute to straighten out your monofilament leader. Get the coil, get the memory out of the butt section of your leader so that when you lay a cast down, you've got a straight line connection between your fly rod, your fly line, your leader, and your fly. It's very frustrating to be fishing with a slinky or a number of coils in your leader because you're going to get a strike and not even detect it. And fourth, when we're actually doing the fishing situations on the lake, it's much more efficient to be holding your rod tip down on the water. Your rod tip should be within 6 inches or right in the surface film of the lake, not held up on a 45-degree angle. If you do that, you're going to have a belly in your line and you're going to miss a strike. Again, we want to have a straight line connection as possible between your fly rod, your fly line, your leader and your fly. So keep the tip of your rod right on the water. If you just thought about those 4 tips there, it would immensely improve your success rate on any waters you plan to fish. One more. A sec. Now I'll move over a bit.
We got him kind of back there, casting up this way.
Oh, is that right? The advantage of double anchors. Having 2 anchors out, the boat doesn't swing back and forth. You maintain complete control of your retrieves. There's nothing more frustrating than having a wind that's changing direction all the time and your boat swinging back and forth. You just don't feel the bites. Mind you, wouldn't matter with me today. Holy shit, did I see a big fish. Did you see that? That was big.
Here we are in a lake in Canada. We're not going to tell you where this lake is, but I'm with 2 legends of stillwater fly fishing here in Canada. We got Phil Rowley and of course my old friend Brian Chan. And they want to tell you a little bit about some materials that you guys developed.
Just a few years ago, Superfly asked Brian and I if we'd be interested in developing a line of materials specifically aimed at the challenges of still waters.
As a fly tyer, I don't tie a lot of stillwater patterns, but I use a lot of dubbings that require reflective materials, and I believe in reflective materials that project color. And I know as a biologist, Brian, you really feel color is very important in still water.
Absolutely, and that's what Phil and I worked on, was the right, a core of right colors that we felt represented the majority of aquatic invertebrates that trout and other fish species in still waters feed on.
Now you blended natural dubbings, you blended synthetic dubbings, and you added a lot of flash to it.
Brian and I started with 6 core colors: olive, light olive, olive dun, tan, calabatus, and brown. And those colors are common through all of the line. And then within the line, we added specific colors that were favorites for the different materials that we like to use. So we have those colors in the sparkle blend dubbings, midge stretch floss, marabous, grizzly marabous, other materials within the line like that. And together, to date, we've got 135 different products within the line that represent all of those colors and all of those great colors for tying stillwater flies.
Well, you've seen both of them on the DVD. You've seen them use the materials, pick up some of the stillwater solutions, and you can create some of your own patterns with these great colors. It's all from Superfly of Canada. And I might say, they create a lot of neat things up here in the far north. You know, as a fly fisherman that travels the world, it's nothing better after a hard day of fishing, even when it's a day like today where it's a little bit cool, to go back to a great place and relax. And I'll tell you, I'm here in southern Alberta, we discovered a really wonderful place, Elk Water Lake Lodge. It's settled in right in the mountains here, and it's just a beautiful place so you can hang your hat and get ready for some great fishing here on the lakes of southern Alberta. We've got some big fish, and it's been a wonderful experience. And the folks at the Elk Water Lake Lodge have really made our stay terrific. So if you're thinking about coming after these big fish, you want to stay in a really nice place, that's the place to stay. You'll find out more information about it right here on this website. You want to visit southern Alberta because I can guarantee you there's some big fish here. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this production. We're in the great province of Alberta, Canada, and as you can see, the lake fishing has been terrific. We're in the Cypress Hills area, beautiful lodge, great accommodations, beautiful fishing. Alberta is the Big West, and I hope you get a chance to visit it like I have. Whether you enjoy fly fishing or just casting a lure or just beautiful scenery, Alberta's got it all. And to find out more about it, check out this website, Discover Alberta. Alberta's got it all.